at lovedreaming.
Okay, my lovely peaches. So I'm going to retell the story, the fictional story that I just told. It's an updated version of the parable of the ship captain, a Buddhist story. I also am sewing my little blanket here while I share the story. So this is completely fictional, totally made up. And it's just a story about how sometimes doing a seemingly terrible thing could in fact be the most compassionate thing that you could ever do. And this story is to ask the question, is it compassion or cruelty? So in this story, there's a villain, and his name is Mr. Villain. And he wants to be the biggest villain in the world. And it's kind of like, Despicable Me, the plot line of Despicable Me, where it's like a competition of villains, All the villains out there are trying to be the worst villain of all time. And so there's a group of them, and they individually do terrible things. And sometimes they do terrible things to people in their own countries who they're supposedly trying to pretend that they're there to protect. The people who they should be protecting. But because they're villains, they get into these powerful roles where they're supposed to be helping people, but what they're actually doing is harming people because they are villains. Okay. So Mr. Villain guy, he wants to be villain number one, but there's a whole other group of villains, and they're already doing really bad stuff. And the thing is that Mr. Villain guy, he lives somewhere that doesn't really like villains. So these other people who are villains, these other villain guys, they live in places where, people don't really like villains, but they've already kind of gotten control. So they can just openly do their villainizing. And this Mr. Villain guy, I guess by trying to take over a peaceful place, it pretends to be peaceful, but it is free, and it is a place where you can speak your mind freely, you can have your own opinions, and you can potentially earn a living. And there's a lot of issues there. It's far from perfect. My kid walking by, far from perfect, but overall it's a pretty decent place to be, and it certainly has problems. And so this is the thing, this is the problem. The problem is that the problems that this place has really need to be fixed, and we really need people in power, people in control of things, that their intention is to do good. So I guess you could say it's a classic story of good versus evil, the villains versus the good guys, the people who want to help humanity, and then the others who they just want to victimize and steal from, and make it seem like other human beings are not worthy, or somehow they're terrible. Okay, so Mr. Villain guy, he realizes that his best chance of becoming the biggest villain in the whole universe is to pair up with some of these other villains that are already powerful. So in this story, Mr. Villain realizes that, even though he's a complete narcissist who wants all the glory to himself, the best thing he can do is to pair up with very rich and powerful, like the richest man on earth villain guy, and these there's like places in the world where there's dictators. I was like talking about like places where these terrible villain guys have already taken over, so they're already like out and about in the street, like, yeah, I rule and my terrible ways is the way of the world. And so they pair up together. these terrible villain guys, they become frenemies with each other, and then the world is watching them make their manifesto against all humanity, and all of a sudden everything just seems to pause, and it's like, oh my God, like there's no more heroes in the world. All the heroes have just, vanished, and the villains are gonna win the day. They're gonna win the world. They're gonna win all the material things in the world, and they're just gonna take over. And but then what actually happens is not that. I've got a rethread. So all of the world's intuitives, dreamers, intellectuals, compassionate bodhisattvas, teachers, healers, they all joined the collective consciousness, and there was a shift that occurred. Something happened that shifted the consciousness of the average person, where they were fooled like the Wizard of Oz. Mr. Villain pretended to be a knight in shining armor of sorts. Many people were fooled. Many people couldn't see through the lies, the deceptions, through all the layers that Mr. Villain and his very, very richest man in the universe villain guy, Mr. X, they deceived so many millions. So many people were confused. It's like their mind was scattered, pixelated. Or they were like in a cult. They were swimming in a cult-like environment where they couldn't see past the lies and the propaganda. Everything seemed to be red, like all they could see was red. They couldn't see past this filter of red lies that made everything seem one way, when in fact it was quite a different way altogether. But something major happened, and there was this intense, violent act. And while we as humanity, we do not agree with violence. Violence is never the answer until and unless we go through the portal and everybody starts to have this similar understanding of reality, and all of a sudden things no longer seem to be what they once were. All of a sudden we can see through things that we could not previously see. At least some of us could see, but not everyone. So all the world's healers got together intuitively, and through the collective consciousness, we were able to transmutate these truths. And Mr. Villain and his group of villains all went to another planet, maybe another galaxy, potentially Mars. The whole entire world celebrated. The whole world was thrilled. And it was a celebration across the whole world. Everybody lined the streets, so thrilled. Yay! We're free! The villains have been sent to Mars, to outer space, where they can never do harm again. And after that, everybody lived happily ever after, with regular schmegular disagreements about taxes or this or that, but nobody ever had to worry again about these villains trying to vie for the top villain spot. And they saved the world, and it became written in the stars forevermore.